Well, it's 3:30, so we'll get started. Welcome to our CARES Act funding webinar. We are going to spend about an hour today talking about going through the process and helping answer some of your questions that you may have about the opportunities for the CARES Act funding. So we do have with us this afternoon that's going to be at the Q&A at the end of the session, Corin Thornton from DCA. We'll have Stephanie Beck from the Office of Planning and Budget and Rachel Kresnick from the State Accounting Office. So between all of us, we should be able to answer most of your questions today so that you can start with submitting your information. So just for a disclaimer for legal purposes, please note that this session is provided for information purposes only. GMA is not authorized to make final determinations about funding request eligibility, but we are here today to provide you with information based on our discussions with state officials, familiarity with the CARES Act legislation, and Treasury guidance. So city officials are urged to contact Corin at DCA or Anna Miller with the Office of Planning and Budget if you need any clarification on a particular item. And this session is not and should not be treated as legal advice. You should consult with your legal counsel if you have questions of a legal nature related to the CARES Act. So we're going to go through the CARES Act, the funding opportunities. I'm actually going to go through submitting a pay request so you can see that firsthand. Go through some do's and don'ts, and then we'll have some tips from the pros, Q&As, and we'll wrap up in an hour. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Larry to get started.
Thank you, Pam, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining the webinar today, and this is certainly an important opportunity for you. We're going to do everything that we can to help you. I want to start by recognizing my colleague, Dave Wills from ACCG. Dave is on the call today, and Dave was kind enough to allow me to sit in on their webinar last week, and just want to make sure that you all are aware that GMA and ACCG have worked together since really March on this effort to negotiate with the state and through all of the setup and the training and the rollout. And so we've been partners in it. I'm very appreciative to Dave and ACCG. And so Dave is listening in on us as well today. Our conversation today is going to be just about round one. So I just want to make sure we all understand that. We're not talking about future rounds that have yet to be determined yet, but everything we're going to discuss today is about round one. We also want to mention that the chat box is going to be closed during the presentation today, and the Q&A is not going to be monitored during the presentation until the end of the presentation. We want everyone to focus on the information that we're going to present to you today, and then at the end, we will actually read any questions that are in the Q&A and respond to those questions. So we're not going to monitor that and respond to it as we're presenting. I'm very concerned with where we are today because there's 1 week left. A week from tomorrow is the deadline of September 1. That deadline is for both rounds of phase one, the 30% round that was placed in your checking account up front, as well as the 70% round. So all of that is round one. And as of this morning, there are 697 local governments in Georgia. And if you subtract the 4 counties and the 48 cities in those counties that are in direct funded, that leaves about 640. And as of this morning, there are 121 local governments that have made it through the first phase, the 30% phase. That's 71 counties out of 155. So that's about 45% of counties, and 50 cities out of roughly 500. So that's 10% of cities that have made it through the 30% phase, the first phase of round one. There are 70 cities that have yet to sign and complete their terms and conditions to even begin the 30% phase. So that's one reason we're having this session today, is really to educate you. So I'm going to walk back real quickly just where we started from. Congress passed the CARES Act on March 27th to provide resources to governments, businesses, and individuals. The U.S. Treasury provided Georgia with approximately $4.1 billion for coronavirus-related expenses. And the Treasury provided that up to 45% of Georgia's funding should be transferred to local governments for necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency. The state has committed to share that 45%. In fact, a letter from the governor it was sent to all cities and counties back on June 29th, made that commitment 1.23 billion. Phase one would be 30%, and that would be two parts to it, a 30% upfront and a 70% reimbursement. And it went on to say that as phase one is exhausted, additional program and disbursement criteria for the remainder of the 1.23 billion will be developed and evaluated to ensure flexibility in responding to COVID-related expenditures. And so now here we are that you have access to this 30%. 30% of that was placed in your checking account once your chief elected officials signed the terms and conditions. The remaining 70% of phase one is available on a reimbursement basis. All of this, both the 30 and the 70, must be used or applied for reimbursement by September 1, 2020, or it may be recalled and reallocated for other uses by the state. And of course, it can only be used for eligible expenses. Cities should first submit the required documentation of expenditures for the 30%, and that was the amount of your direct deposit. So those expenses should only equal the amount of the 30%. So before you can even access the 30%, you've got to, the 70%, you've got to use your 30%. Once DCA and OPB have signed off on those, then cities can begin to upload expense documentation to request reimbursement of the remaining 70% of phase one. And as I said earlier, both the 30% and the 70%, which are both phase one, those requests must be submitted by September 1. So you'll have at least two projects and possibly more. So for instance, if you submit one project, your public safety payroll, back to March 1, and let's say it was March and April, that would get you the 30%. And then once you're approved for that, you would begin another project, a project 2 or project 2, 3, 4 for your 70%, but you will have to submit additional projects. Now, what we're going to do now is just take a moment to put up here on the screen where all of you can see, and obviously with 500 cities, we're going to scroll through this, but basically I want you all to look at this and find your city, because we're hearing some cities are not even aware of how much that they're entitled to and where they are in the process. So this chart shows by city name, the disbursement type. That's either going to be advanced or reimbursement. Advanced is the first phase, the 30% phase. Reimbursement is the second phase, or the 70% phase. The reimbursements are all the way at the bottom. And there are only 25 cities in that 70% phase as of this time. So if you look, the next column says the amount awarded of the phase one was 30%. The amount that you have requested is shown. The amount that has been approved by State Accounting Office, OPB, DCA is then shown, and the amount remaining to be requested. So I hope you're taking a look. I'm just going to be quiet here and let Pam just scroll through so that you see your city, how much you're awarded, how much you've requested, how much has been approved, and how much you have remaining. So we're now approaching the end of the 30%, and you see the remaining 70%. There's about 25 cities that are in the phase two. Some have already been made whole, have all of their money, and others are just beginning the process. And as the state has been encouraging for some time, they're really asking you to do a look back with this round one. Look back to March 1 for expenses you incurred and that you already have receipts for that you can submit. Public safety payroll, for those of you that have public safety, the state has made the determination that all public safety is COVID related. We're strongly encouraging cities that have public safety to do that and submit that. That's a low hanging fruit. That's an easy way. And importantly, for some that are asking questions that I'd like to have a grant program, I'd like to do this. If you just submit something that's eligible, particularly something you've already accrued, like public safety payroll, then you receive that reimbursement. At that point, it's your money. So rather than risk right now trying to set up a grant program in 1 week, which you can't do, submit public safety payroll, technology upgrades you made, receive your funding, and then it's your money at that point. You can use it in any way that you'd like to do to set up a grant program or some buy a police car or whatever you might prefer to meet your needs. So we're really strongly encouraging you to look back to March 1 for things you've already bought and consumed that are COVID related, whether it's PPE, laptop computers for work at home, pay public safety payroll, those type of things that would help you be made whole quickly and simply and easily. And with that, I'm going to transition now to our Tiffany Stanley, one of our municipal consultants. She's actually in the Dublin City Hall, and she's going to walk you through the grants portal itself and show you how to fill out a request. So, our Tiffany?
Thank you, Larry. All right, so we'll briefly go through the grants portal process, and hopefully by now you have received the invitation to access the portal. But just in case you have not, I want to first go through the process of what you will actually see once you have been put in as a user to access the portal. You'll receive an invitation, and in that subject line, it will say, "Welcome to the Georgia Cares portal. Action is required." And the email will come from grantcare mgr at opb.georgia.gov. And that is for those that have not accessed the portal. And so what would happen once you get this email, you will then click on the link for Register for the CARES Act in the Georgia portal. Once you click on that link, it will take you to your invitation code page. The invitation is already populated. And so to access this portal, you have to pretty much, you'll hit the register, which will take you to the screen to enter, to create a username and a password. Once you create that username and password, you will then click on register, which will take you to your profile page. On this profile page, you will see the information that was entered in by the person that made you an authorized user. So verify that that information is correct, and if it is, then you will hit update. And at that time, it will then take you to your grants portal page. And as that loads on the grants portal page, you will see the information pertaining to your particular grant. If you've already done all this process and you just need to go in and log in to access the portal, you would go to cares.georgia.gov in order to access that portal. And then in the right-hand corner where you see my name, you will actually see a sign-in link for you to sign in. So once you sign in, it will take you to your grants page, and at the bottom you'll see the ID information that has your grant, project number, and information about your particular grant. So the very first phase, like you stated, is the 30% allocation amount that was deposited into your account. That's where you will see the local entity round 1. This is actually a hyperlink that you can click on that will take you to access that particular grant information. This shows you the amount of your advance payment, the amount that was awarded that should have been direct deposited into your account after you signed those terms and conditions. And you'll see details about the primary contact, the status of the particular grant, your grant amount. Here's where projects, where you will actually go in to create a new project to do that actual payment request. You click on add the new project, which takes you to another page. And so when you're putting in that project name for this particular grant, we did the easy. We put in public safety as the, we'll do COVID-19, public safety expenses. Project start date, you actually will go in and once you run your payroll records, you can start as far back as March the 1st of 2020 of this year. And so for that particular project, so we'll start the date from March the 1st. And because you have two different rounds that you can actually put in the public safety expenses for. And we went to May the 1st as the date that it actually ended. And then the information as far as the project information, you will put where you could put where your police department is, or where the main location for the city's address is. You can put that information. It's pre-populated, and so that information goes into the portal. So project description. When you're putting in your project description, your project justification, and the planned project outcome, the state has asked that you provide as much detail as possible. You have to imagine that when you send this information in, the state is not familiar with your city's payroll processes. So in that project description, what are you submitting? So if you're submitting the public safety payroll expenses due to COVID-19, that you could pretty much put that in as your project description. But again, just make sure you provide as much information as possible in that project description. Project justification. It was COVID-19. You would put COVID-19. What you could say the patrol personnel was assigned to pretty much have to go out, and respond to COVID-related calls. For the Treasury guidance actually made it to where they pretty much dedicated any public safety, and this is your police department or your fire department, personnel costs could be turned in as justification for COVID-related expenses. So in that project justification, you will put as much information as you could possibly put in to explain why it's justified that those expenses were COVID-related. What is the planned project outcome? You put information in there as far as reimbursement for COVID-related expenses. You go in, like I said, provide just as many information as you possibly can, just for purposes of this training. I'm making it just as short as possible. But when think about when your DCA rep gets this information, what you want to make it as easy as possible for them to be able to know why you are submitting the expenses that you are. So if you don't have any public safety expenses, you may be turning in expenses for a laptop because you want to telework and you don't currently have that capability. So that could possibly be up under your project justification, that the justification is due to social distancing guidelines and city hall being closed, that you need laptops to be able to remote work. And so, providing as many details as possible is going to be your keys to success in actually submitting your project. So here, like I said, I just briefly gave a description. You add the project. After you add that project, then it takes you to information about your project that you just literally entered. And then you want to go in and do the payment request. When you go in and do the payment request, this is where you have to give a little bit more detail. You do a new direct expense. The expense pay date, we started with March the 1st to May the 1st before, so we could say we'll put May the 1st on this particular one. The category, once you click on the link, it's a drop-down record. So you have to choose one of these pre-populated categories. It could be economic support, FEMA match, medical, nursing home assistance, payroll expenditures, public health, or other. For this particular one, it was payroll expenditures. So we would select that. The allowable activity, again, you would get a drop-down menu. It's payroll expenses for the human services employees, or payroll expenses for public health, healthcare employees, public payroll expenses for public safety employees, or payroll for substantially different use or workers' compensation. So this particular one, you have to choose one. So we're choosing payroll expenses for the public safety employees. In this description, it asks you to please provide a detailed description of the expense, including the justification. Again, this is the time to sell your project and to make sure that the information that you are submitting, that there will not be any questions, because you have to go through 2 levels of approval. The first level goes to a DCA representative. Then the second level goes to the state office. So it has to go through both levels of those approvals. So you want to make sure that you are providing them as much detail as possible. And again, I'm not just for this informational purposes. Make sure you put more information than I'm putting. All right, so the quantity, we're going to do 1, and I'm going to do each. And then if you remember, my grant amount was up top $249,400.08. So for my payroll purposes, that is what I'm going to put in as the amount that I am asking for in this particular project. And then there, I'll add the direct expense. And it's processing. So from here, now this asks for your supporting documentation. So your supporting documentation could be a contract, equipment, general items, labor, or materials and supplies. For this particular project, since we have uploaded public safety expenses, we're going to upload supporting documentation dealing with the labor. So this will take me to the files that are populated. You have to pretty much scan any of, if you cannot download the information directly to your computer, then you can scan the supporting documentation to your computer. And so you will find that particular files that you are looking for. And so we're looking for the pay rate report and the employee rate change. So I'm gonna add that. And then on this particular sub-document type, what type of document was this? And so this was labor cost and source documentation. So I'm gonna upload that. And then upload as many document files as possible needing to justify for those particular items. And then you will save that direct expense. Once you have completed this process, then it takes you back to where you can see your payment request. And if everything looks fine, if you've uploaded all documentations, all direct expenses related to that particular category that you are submitting, that's the time that you will actually submit for payment to the state. You will hit that button. I'm not going to hit it for this one because it's already been done, but you can go to up top. You see payment requests. This shows you the payment requests that have been made and submitted. It gives you the amount that's been requested and what date you submitted on, what's the payment status. If you probably see in process immediately after you submit it. But this particular project has already been submitted and thankfully approved by the state. And so you can see that here as to that process is what's been done with this particular project. All right, so just to give you some examples of supporting documentation for those payroll expenses. Here I have an example of a pay history report. In this pay history report, this goes through and outlines, this is for police patrol for the department. This outlines the earnings that were received during that time period that you are submitting, along with the deductions, which you can, remember that you can get reimbursement for any benefits. And so we have this detailed documentation that shows pretty much what that employee was paid during the time period that you're asking for reimbursement. So you have the earnings, the deductions, the taxes, and on this particular one, it gives you a summary of that one employee, the total amount of their earnings, including any overtime or holiday that they had. For this, you had 673 total hours that they were paid at a total of $12,779, and that included all payroll plus any benefits. And this is just the end of that particular report, showing some additional deductions and the taxes that were paid. Because that particular payroll report did not have the amount of hourly, the hourly amount that that employee paid, there was another report that was generated that shows the pay rate report. And on this pay rate report, it shows that hourly amount, plus it has their positions. You got to make sure that you include a job title when you are submitting your supporting documentation. So this particular report shows a pay rate report on that employee. And they went a little further as far as adding some additional documentation. They did an employee rate change history report, because once you go through and add up what that employee was paid, I believe this particular employee ended up getting a cost of living adjustment or anniversary increase. And so they outline what those particular employee was making during that time period. So one of the questions that have been asked is, once you've submitted a project and a payment request, and you find out that that particular piece that you submitted was not authorized and you need to make a change, can you delete what you have put in? So we asked the state that question, and you cannot delete a project, but you can delete a payment request. The county was successful in deleting a payment request. And how do you do that? So they say that the county submitted that project documentation to the portal for reimbursement and was later notified that that expense was not eligible. Therefore, that project expense had to be deleted from the system in order to allow for other project expenditures to be added. So to delete that project with that submitted payment request, you go into the payment request section of the module and click on payment request. And then this will click on the payment ID that is on the left-hand side of the item that is to be deleted. And from there, then you click on the edit button on the right-hand side. And this is pretty much after it has been reset back from the state, because once they will send it back for revisions if they find something that has not been approved. And at that point, they're the only ones who can allow you to be able to go back and edit any details to what you have submitted. So if you have that capability, once you can go in and edit, then you scroll, option 1 is to scroll to the bottom of that page and click delete. Then the pop-up will appear, and then you have to click delete again to say that this direct expense and related documentation will be marked for deletion by the system. Option 2 is to click in the cost or the unit box and change whatever amount that you had in the cost unit box, change that to 0. And then you click on the save direct expense, and then after the change is saved, then you would click for payment to submit for payment again. Now, the county that did this, they still received a return for revision because it was a $0 request. However, submitting that $0 request allowed the county to request the remainder of their 30% funding. All right, now I'll turn this over to Mr. Terrell Jacobs, who will go through some Q&A with you.
Thank you, our Tiffany, and hopefully Pam will pull that up in regards to some Q&As. And just want to advise all the cities that are on. I see we have about 187, so give or take. Definitely keep in mind, please ask your Q&A questions beyond the ones that we have up here at the end, if you don't mind. The first question, which is the big one, which is, are public safety emergency medical personnel, and firefighter payroll eligible expenses? And that is yes. And keep in mind, I know previously there was some concern about that, but it is 100%. And I know some cities, some counties have had the concern about that it may not be COVID related, or it may be something that was already budgeted. But 100% of all activities in relationship to the interaction with the COVID situation are reimbursable, including benefits as such that our Tiffany just mentioned. Next slide. All right, can a local government designate its allocation to another city or county? And the answer is yes. Now, obviously, that's going to be a tall order in a short period of time, but if you so choose to, you need to proceed with the portal process and then contact the DCA and the OPB folks to facilitate that transfer allocation award to the another city or county in that regard. Are payroll costs allowed for those employees who were sent home to work due to the closure of City Hall? No. Performing the same duties for the different location does not constitute a significant difference. Therein lies is the issue, a significant different purpose, and is not reimbursable. If a local government has yet not exceeded its total budget, how does it meet the standard of filing only for unbudgeted expenses? So the funds may be used for COVID-related expenditures that were not known and expected when your budget was passed. So you can use it for not known items that were unbudgeted. Okay, they have to make that proof of that. Can a city enter a project for planned expenditures even if they have not incurred to spend against phase 1 dollars in order to meet the September 1 deadline? No. Goods and services must be received. Don't think that it can be encumbered. That's been a lot of question and concern. It has to be received to qualify for reimbursement. Can cities seek reimbursement of CARES Act funding for non-profit or direct assistance to citizens or in our businesses as COVID related to assist with economic support like food and utility? Yes. Expansion of food and utility assistance program in order to address economic issues result is eligible. Now, once again, you have to, if that's one that you're seeking, you only have a short time frame to deal with that one. All right, can local government purchase PPE and sanitation supplies and provide them to schools? Yes, local entities can use those funds to help with that, those items. Can cities retroactively pay hazard pay to public safety personnel as an eligible expense? No. If you did not already have that hazard pay in place, you cannot go back and retroactively. What is the latest that a local government can submit a request for reimbursement? Reimbursement request supporting document must be received by September 1. That's 11:59 midnight, close to midnight on September 1. So if you don't have it in, it will not be received by that time. If DCA or SAO must return a reimbursement request for additional information or revision, the request will still be considered submitted as the original submission date. Reimbursement requests that have been deemed ineligible and rejected for payment may not be resubmitted. I repeat, may not be resubmitted. So if it's ineligible, so if you're going to hit that deadline, you might make sure it's an eligible expense. All right. Eligibility expenditures, COVID-19 related expenses of public hospitals, clinics, and similar facilities, those are eligible. Cost of providing COVID testing, eligible. Emergency medical response expenses, including transportation related to COVID. Expenses for communication and enforcement by the state and local government, public health orders related to COVID, personal protection, and sanitizing products, all related. Expenses for disinfection of public areas and other facilities, expenses for public safety, measures undertaken in response to COVID-19, expensing for quarantine individuals, payroll expenses for, as we just mentioned, that's the primary one, expenses for food delivery to residents, including senior citizens and other vulnerable populations. Next one, Pam. Expenses to improve telework capabilities for public employees to enable compliance with COVID public health precautions. Expenses for providing paid sick leave and paid family medical leave, the extended one to public employees to enable compliance with the COVID-related precautions. Expenses for care for homeless population provided to mitigate COVID effects and enable compliance with the public health precautions. Expenditures related to provisions of grants to small businesses to reimburse the costs of businesses interrupted caused by required closures, unemployment insurance costs related to COVID-19 public health emergency, if such costs will not be reimbursed by the federal government pursuant to the CARES Act. Any other COVID-related expenses reasonable to the function of government that satisfy the fund's eligibility. All right, we're going to turn it over to Ms. Pam Helton for the do's and don'ts.
Okay, so let's talk about what we can do and what we shouldn't do. Please submit your payroll for public safety employees first, because that's your largest expense item usually. And if you have them, that should be submitted because it's approved. You know that those salaries are. So you'll need to submit your payroll summary, listing the pay period, the department, the titles, the rate of pay, hours worked, and the gross amount. Do not include the admin or management unless you can document that the hours worked were dedicated to the COVID-19 mitigation. There is a wonderful training little video. It's only about 2 or 3 minutes, 5 minutes maybe at the most long. And I've got the link that you can click this on to go to it, which is a great, gives you an example of some payroll registers that you could send, the summary sheets. Your benefits are also eligible, so submit those as well. So do submit your paid sick leave that's required by federal legislation for those that were having to go home because they were being exposed to COVID-19, or either they had it themselves, but under that EFMLA Act, then they are required, you're required to pay them, but you can ask for reimbursement for that. Do provide as much information as possible. We've heard that don't use the other category on that drop down unless it is absolutely necessary. And also submit full documentation for the items ordered or received. We have heard that the best internet browser is either Chrome or Firefox, that there are problems with Internet Explorer, so try the other. And do not send large files for supporting documentation. If you can break them up and upload as a part 1, 2, and 3, it would help tremendously. And also, if you have a long list of PPE supplies that you're requesting reimbursement for, if you'll just include them as one expenditure and then have a list of all those items with it, you don't need to submit those each item separately. And if you purchase something locally, you might want to, on the receipt, note it as a purchase locally. And for items delivered without delivery documentation, that you could take a picture of it and send it, or you could take a screenshot of the tracking information. If you didn't have a packing slip or whatever that you couldn't prove that you had it. If the PPE items have been used in the past and they're not available to document, you can provide a statement by the mayor stating that the items were received and used. And you can create as many projects as you need up under that grant award. If one item is questioned, the entire project is sent back for clarification. So it's sometimes better to do a project like for payroll, project for PPE, or a project for technology and break them up. Do not create a pay request for each item. Include a list of items which equals the amount of the pay request. And please do not include sales tax. You know, where cities, local governments do not have to pay sales tax, and they should not be on your invoice. But you can allow for the shipping costs, and they are allowed expenses. So we do have some links to some great information that we do want you to look at and to view, because it gives you a great deal of information that you've been having questions about. If you will go through those training, documentation training videos and look at the training portal, on the portal training, you'll get a lot of information out of it, and you can just print it and have it by your desk as you go through that process. There is an updated information sheet, Q&A sheet that's been posted on the CARES Act website, so please take a look at that as well. It was just posted on Friday. So now we're going to open up for our Q&As, and we're going to ask Corin and Stephanie and Rachel if they will help us to answer the questions from our cities. Emily?
All right, our first question that we have is they received acceptance of the 30% advancement. The info we submitted was for more than the 30%, but of course we only asked for the 30% and noted that we would ask for the rest as a subsequent draw. Would we need to provide that, just the summary sheet we provided showing that additional amount since we already submitted the detailed documentation?
So I'll jump in and answer that one. This is Karin Thornton with the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. I would say go ahead when you do your 70% request, reference that same language that you already received the 30% and submit the same documentation, because it depends on, a different reviewer might be looking at it. We want to make sure that the information is in the system for audit purposes. So go ahead and upload that same information for that 70% request as well.
Thank you. The next question that we have is, can you send us a spreadsheet that was shown? We missed our city, the one that Pam was going through earlier.
And
They'll
Cheryl,
send me the, yeah.
that was Waycross, so we can either put that back up later or send Tanya an email.
All right, the next question is, if the mayor is the only authorized user and the finance director signs in, is it okay for her to change the information to her own?
This is Stephanie at OPB. Yes, you can have as many authorized users as you need on the account. So the mayor just needs to add her as an authorized user, and she should get her own portal invitation to be able to log into the system separately.
Okay. We can only turn in reimbursement requests for the 30% on expenditures that were received and paid for through May 1st, 2020. Question mark, question mark.
March.
No, anything between March 1st and present is eligible on either one of the funding allocations. There's no time delineation between the 30 and the 70%.
And also, Stephanie, I think, not sure exactly what the question meant, but saying, can we only apply for the 30%? No, you apply for the 30% and then you'll get notice to apply for the 70%, but you've got to apply for both of them before September 1, just in case that is the question.
Right, and this is Rachel from the State Accounting Office. Another thing with the payroll, and it might refer to that, is sometimes, depending on when your pay period starts, it's hard to determine the days included, because it should be the days worked, not your paycheck date. So if the paycheck is 3/6 and it looks like you have a 2-week pay period, we're probably going to question that first included pay period, unless it's obvious it truly starts with the wages as of 3/1.
All right, our next question is, can you pay volunteer firefighters for their service for running COVID-related calls?
And I think the answer to that would be, this is a reimbursement program. So if you paid them, you could seek reimbursement because it is public safety. If you did not pay them, then you certainly can't seek reimbursement.
All right, the next question is, I am uploading my document. However, it is not attached to my request once DCA receives it.
So I'll go ahead and answer that one. We've had a few instances of this, and I would say reach out to your DCA regional rep and we will work with Grant Care to see what the issue is. Sometimes it's a browser issue, sometimes it's on either end, or sometimes it's a document file size, but just reach out to your DCA regional rep and we can take it from there.
All right, the next question is, will a spreadsheet in Excel be acceptable?
I'm thinking they mean for payroll, but I'll answer either way. As long as it has the criteria that we're looking for, the pay dates, the titles, things like that, then yeah, that would be fine. And especially if you have a lot of invoices, we prefer there be a summary spreadsheet or something attached as well. So that would be fine.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing about payroll as well, where Excel spreadsheets can come in handy, is if it's not clear on your payroll printouts what job classifications are included, and you can, and the easiest way to tell us that is in a spreadsheet, please do that, because in that way we're not having to come back and say, well, we don't know what officer so-and-so's duties are. So just if you can give us that kind of information up front, a spreadsheet is a great way to do it.
All right, the next question is, if a portion of a project is ineligible, will the remainder, which is eligible, be awarded, or will the entire project be kicked back?
It's a little of both. That's why they have the expense capability, so that we do have the ability to either approve or reject at the expense level. So there are certain things where we can push back one and then reject another one. So that's the whole intent of breaking it out into the expenses, is that there's that capability.
All right, the next question is, if a business was closed, can they be paid during this time?
So that one, we refer back to the U.S. Treasury guidance, and there's wording in there of supporting business interruption due to COVID. So, the city would have to establish what criteria they're going to use for that, and then how they're going to get that support from the business, be it profit and loss for the past couple of years. But as Larry's mentioned a few times, given the tight time frame, it's possible, but there's quite a bit more substantiation required for that scenario.
Yes, and I would add to that, since that is a grant program, the city would have needed to already approve the grant program with rules, regulations, and so forth. And if that's not already done, there's no way to do it in a week.
All right, the next question is, if you have elderly people that paid for food delivery, can that expense be reimbursed?
If they're meaning to reimburse an individual, that's going to be more difficult than if they are looking to give a grant to a meal service provider to expand their services. Trying to show individual, you're going to run into the same issues on how you document it, how you took applications, etc. Trying to reimburse individuals for out-of-pocket expenses.
Next question is, does the first project have to be approved before you upload the next project / pay request?
So not necessarily, but under the 30% advance payment reconciliation process, you can't exceed what that 30% is. So you can submit several almost simultaneously, so long as they did not exceed that 30%.
Okay. The next question has, that one's been covered actually. Could we get a copy of all the slides you have presented?
Yes.
All right. The next question is, it is our understanding that public safety payroll is an approved expense. However, prior to our current fiscal year, our firefighters were considered stipends. The city has an agreement with firefighters to operate the station and report to emergency calls, and through the COVID-19 pandemic, they have assisted in the mitigation process. Stipends are defined as individuals who are contract workers to the city of Bloomingdale. Would they still be an approved expense for Phase 1 public safety? I have emailed our regional DCA.
Yes, I believe those should be eligible.
All right, next question. Where can we see the spreadsheet on governments that have submitted, et cetera, that we can send out to you separately? When submitting payroll, will it be accepted without the signature of the department heads? Our payroll is created on Edmunds and a payroll report is printed.
Generally, we have been, and actually, a printout directly from the payroll system, like used in the example, is almost preferable because it clearly shows the amounts paid and then the employer share. So as long as we can tell, it's directly from the system, that's fine.
Next question is, can a city utilize the local chamber of commerce as a conduit to provide small business support? The city would provide an amount, for example, $500,000, and the chamber would establish an application process, review and vet the applications requiring the financial statements, occupational tax certificate, location in the city, etc. The chamber would set up a revenue account. If so, would the city have met its obligation for expenditure of funds within the allowed uses of funds by September 1st?
Presumably, yes. What they would need to, they would then be responsible for subrecipient monitoring of the chamber, and then subsequently anyone that they gave those grants to. And any activity in terms of the chamber giving funds to a recipient for COVID relief purposes would need to be spent by 12/30. And again, the chamber would have to document that that recipient did spend those money on allowable uses by 12/30.
And the city would also still be responsible for the use of those funds.
Correct.
All right, next question is, what happens if you submit for the 30% advance and waiting for approval? How does the September 1 deadline apply for a city to upload the remaining 70%?
Well, we would encourage them to get it in as quickly as possible, which is why if you go the public safety payroll route, that's the most straightforward and usually the biggest bang for the buck to submit. It makes it easy for us to prioritize kind of looking at those large dollar, all 30% up front, so that we can get that 70% opened as soon as possible.
All right. The next one is, does payroll expenditures have to be exact amounts of the 30% submitted or within $1?
I mean, the support should match. I know sometimes the payroll support is more than the 30%, which is fine. Just include your 30%. And like we mentioned previously, include some comment that it will be submitted also under the 70%. I think there was some questions in the beginning about that quantity. So as noted in the example, you can just use the quantity of 1 and then your exact amount of the payroll.
All right, the next question is, if all funds have not been spent, can we order supplies as long as they are ordered before September 1st?
Whether it's project or materials or capital projects or vehicles, they must be ordered, received, and paid for by September 1.
Goods and services must be received by September 1st to receive reimbursement. And I think they made it as a question. We have a project we would like to have funded that will not be completed by September 1st. Can we apply for the 70% to fund this?
Both the 30 and the 70% must be used by September 1, and all projects must be completed, delivered, paid for by September 1.
The next question is, what would count as documentation of receiving a knuckle boom truck used for excess waste?
Not exactly sure what that is, but I mean, we've been accepting titles. We've had like sales agreements. There's pickup dates. I guess it kind of depends. I don't know if those have a title necessarily or VIN numbers associated to them, or some sort of assertion, by the mayor or some person in the city itself.
Along with the picture of the mayor operating it.
I have been getting some good pictures, I must admit.
All right.
Can I follow up on that one? I would caution though on the extra waste front. The Treasury guidance that we've seen has been specific to disposal of PPE type costs, not necessarily just everybody was at their house and decided to purge this spring. So just something to be aware of when submitting those types of requests. We are still looking for that to be pretty directly COVID related, not some kind of, third degree relationship to COVID.
All right, next question is, along with police, are sanitation employees deemed eligible for reimbursement?
Not at 100% level like with public safety police employees. Now, if there were extenuating circumstances where they had a large number of staff out and they had to pay overtime in order to continue picking up sanitation, that might be eligible, but not at the 100% offset like with public safety employees.
All right, the next question is, what if you don't have invoices, but you do have canceled checks?
I mean, we would need to see some sort of invoice or support for the items that were purchased and received. I guess I don't know the claims process in every city, but I would think you would need that support to get the claim paid in the first place. But
Does the 70% need to be equal the exact remaining amount?
I'm not, again, you would submit your projects and you could submit for whatever amount is eligible for reimbursement. I guess if the city felt they didn't have enough to do the full 70%, then they would not be able to request the full 70% because that 70% piece will be on a reimbursable phase for whatever support comes in, and then it's approved and then it's paid out. So if for some reason they didn't have enough, then they wouldn't be able to request up to the full amount.
All right, the next question is, does payroll expenditures have to be the exact amounts of the 30% received when submitted?
I mean, again, I know some submitted some smaller receipts and then had a payroll amount that was more than the 30%. So they could submit up to the 30%. And then if they so choose, submit the remaining once that 70% opened up.
All right, next question is, we contract out our law enforcement to the county. We are having trouble coming up with expending all of the 30% before September 1st. What is the likelihood of not receiving future funds because a round one funding was not fully expended?
Nothing about this phase will impact anybody's eligibility on any subsequent phases. The governor has not yet released any guidelines on how those future phases may be distributed. So I would not want anyone to think that they would be excluded from receiving any future funding simply because they didn't have needs at this time.
All right, the next question is, if we purchase an item this week and it exceeds the remainder of the 30% that is available for our city, what documentation do we need to be able to utilize the remaining funds with the 70%?
So the system will make you resubmit and re-upload for the 70%, and you could just refer to the carryover of the previous 30% and put in potentially the project number or something like that. But I know the system will make you do an upload again in a new project.
Generally, how long does it take for approval if we're submitting payroll?
So I just want to remind everyone, if you're not aware of this, how the approval process works. So when you submit something into the portal, it goes to level 1 review, which it'll say review in progress on your as a status. That means that the DCA regional rep is taking a look at it. Payrolls are pretty easy to review if all the documentation is submitted and it's clear to us that it's for non-administrative public safety. But there are just 12 of us. And then we have 3 incredibly hardworking partners at the state accounting office that do all of the level 2 review. So once it goes to level 2, it'll say decision in progress. And that's where those 3 very hardworking staff are doing everything they can to get these submitted through the process. So I hesitate to say any sort of specific time frame, but we are moving those as quickly as possible. And as been mentioned several times already, those payroll ones are the easiest for for you as a local government to submit, but also for us to process. And we are trying to get that 30% reconciled as quickly as possible so that the portal will open up the 70% for you guys to come back in for reimbursement. So I can't give you an exact time frame, but just know that we are working as quickly as we can. And you know, we're doing our best because we know you guys need this money.
All right, the next question says, what documents would need to be provided for volunteer firefighters' pay? And I assume they're talking about the call pay that they would receive for responding to calls.
I mean, I think it would be similar to what you would normally pay them off of, you know, some sort of support of like the number of calls. I'm not sure if it's an hourly or just a flat call rate. Whatever document they normally fill out, and then whatever, you know, the approval process is at your city, be it approved if they have a department head or if it goes straight to, you know, the city clerk or city accounting department. It would just sort of that same process that supports what's to be paid.
Well, there was a comment that said, thank you for all your hard work. So I wanted to share that in between questions. The next question is, if we have a local nonprofit whose purpose is to provide assistance to needy family and individuals, could local governments administer a grant agreement for funds to be granted to that nonprofit to provide delivered meals for seniors moving past September 1st?
Again, yes. I mean, if you give the funds to the nonprofit by September 1st, then we are considering that spent on the local's end. But that local is then responsible for all the sub-recipient monitoring of that entity and any ultimate recipients of those funds. And those still have to be spent by 12/30.
All right, the next question is, are COVID tests for employees reimbursable? We've had 3 employees come down with the virus at 3 different times, and each time we send employees to be retested. Has anyone covered this question?
If the city paid directly to have them retested as a stipulation for coming back to work, then yes, we could reimburse the city. I don't know that we could reimburse the individual employee for that cost of getting that retest. So it could be a little bit gray there. But we have approved other expenses where an employer purchased test or paid for the test on behalf of their employees.
All right, the next question is, if the 30 and the 70% request must be received and paid for by September 1st, what is the December 30th date deadline?
The Federal CARES Act says the funds must be used by December 30th. The state contemplated having potentially 3 rounds of funding. This is round 1, which is made up of a 30 and a 70% piece. And the state, to try and expedite it, and asked that you'd use it as a look back to March 1 to apply for things you'd already consumed, already purchased, already utilized, like payroll. Future rounds then could be used up to December 30th. So that is the plan, and the Federal CARES Act says funds can be used for December 30th, but the state has said round 1 funds must be used by September 30th.
All right, the next question is, if eligible expenses don't make the first phase, will governments be able to use phase 2 and phase 3 for projects that were started prior to September 1?
If it's, I guess to make sure I understand, if it's something that we have said is not allowable under this first phase, then it would not be allowable under subsequent phases. But if it's just a timing issue, again, the ultimate timing is December 30th for US Treasury guidelines. So any future phases would have a different set of time constraints associated. But I would not want anyone to just presume how funds might be allocated in the future and spend based on that.
Okay, the next question is that they were told that the 70% had to be requested by 9/1 and that they had until December 31st to spend the amount. They thought they had that clarified, but now it sounds like everything has to be spent by September 1st. Is that correct?
Yes, the 70% is a reimbursement base. So you should have already incurred those expenses, received those goods and services, and now you're asking to be reimbursed that 70% portion. The only amount that was available on an advance was that 30%.
Stephanie, would the only exception to that be a grant program through a third party?
Yes, so far that's the only
Right.
kind of way around that we've contemplated.
Right, and since that question wasn't specific, I just felt we should mention that if they're doing a grant program through a United Way, those funds could be used up to for eligible expenditures up to December 30th, but everything else is a hard date, September 1.
Correct.
All right, the next question is, we submitted for the 70% immediately after approval of our 30%. Now we see that round 1, part 2 is open. We then submitted a duplicate request under part 2. Do we need to do anything to preserve our request?
So I guess this morning or over the weekend, our software vendor did do some changes to the software that inadvertently opened up some of the part 1 items. So that specific city might want to reach out to their DCA rep because there might be a duplicate in the system that will ask to be deleted. So there is a little quirk right as of today in our system.
And I don't think that's the case, but I'll double check and get back with Marcus on that one.
Okay, yeah, because that is one that we identified has been impacted by this quirk.
All right, the next question is, are we to use gross pay or net pay figures for payroll expenses?
So we're allowing gross pay, as well as we mentioned, you can also include the employer share of any benefits paid, such as the employer share of FICA, employer share of insurances, things like that can all be included.
All right, next question is, would purchasing a generator be viable under the CARES Act?
It would depend on what the purpose of the generator was for.
You would have to find a way to classify that generator as COVID related. That might be a challenge. Perhaps for a hospital or a health agency, but otherwise I'm not sure.
Next question is, if our COVID-related expenses incurred during March 1st through September 1st exceeded total Phase 1 grant funds, may it be possible to submit those expenses for reimbursement during Phase 2 or Phase 3?
Again, for any future phases, as long as it's eligible spend, it would depend on what the parameters are that the governor sets around any future funding phases. You just couldn't ask for the same thing twice.
All right, the next question is, can the city get money for providing a sheriff department substation? We don't have a police department.
Yes.
If that substation exists all the time, Stephanie or whoever was going to go ahead and answer that, go ahead and answer it.
No, that's okay. Sorry, Larry. Yes, if that's the law enforcement entity for that city, then that would be reimbursable.
All right, the next question is, can you be short a few dollars on expenditures when submitting for the 30%?
You can be, but it will not open up your 70%.
Right, it has to be within $1 to open up the 70%.
And it's okay, sorry, Ted. It is okay if you've got something that then is going to straddle the two phases. So if you've got an invoice that's going to take up the last few dollars of one in order to open up the 70, just please make sure that you're very, very transparent where you're double submitting for Rachel and her team so that they can see you're not paying out the same dollars twice. We don't want it to be confusing.
All right, the next question is, can you please revisit the sanitation employee payroll being covered? Is it eligible?
Not at the 100% level like public safety officers. It would depend on the circumstances if they are doing something substantially different from what they previously did, if they're having to deliver it in a substantially different way, if they've had to potentially contract out for additional workers because of, again, a large amount of their workforce being out due to COVID, something along those lines. It cannot just be a one-for-one offset like it is with public safety employees. So we would encourage them to probably discuss that with us before they submitted that.
All right, the next question is it safe to assume that the state accounting office will prioritize reviews of 30% submissions over 70% submissions, or are these reviews completed on a first in, first out basis?
No, we are prioritizing the 30% over the 70%.
All right, next question. I'm sorry to ask, but could we revisit the question, local chambers of commerce administering funds for grants to local businesses? If I understood correctly, the chamber could basically serve as a pass-through entity in this capacity.
Depends on how you're defining pass-through. Yes, it's allowable. However, since it is federal money, the city itself who receives it is still eligible. They're still required to make sure it's used for eligible purposes. So that would be the subrecipient monitoring of making sure it's used. And then if for the chamber were to pass it along, you would need to make sure that that second party used it as appropriate. So the federal government does have a lot of restrictions outlined as to how to follow that money throughout the whole life cycle.
And you would certainly have to have rules and regulations on it in advance, because as an example, every business in a community is not a member of the chamber. So you would have to be sure that a chamber could not administer a program that would be eligible only for chamber members. So I do think that it would be important that you have established rules and regulations to ensure that everyone in your city is treated equally and fairly from that program.
All right, next question is, would a small truck for the public works employees to use that they are not all traveling together be an approved expense?
It could be, if they've determined to limit exposure and that you need 2 people on a certain job or something. But again, the truck itself would need to be received by September 1st.
Yeah, I do think there's examples where cities have bought vehicles to separate their crews to try and protect them. So you might have 4 guys on the utility service truck. You buy another truck and put them in 2 so you don't have as much risk of exposure. That, according to my review of the guidelines, is eligible. But of course, now with a week left, you would have to purchase that truck, have it delivered, and pay for it by September 1.
All right, the next question is, when requesting payroll, should we only request for hours worked, or can we include sick and vacation time?
So for payroll, we've been allowing for any sort of time that occurred during that payroll period. So be it sick, overtime, regular time, that would all be allowed.
In regards to the generator question that came up earlier, the comment that they have sent back in says the generator would be used to keep the well running in case power went out. Would that be an eligible expense for a generator?
I would say likely no.
I would say that whether the well loses power or not wouldn't be COVID related. So I don't think that it would be eligible.
That may be FEMA.
All right, the next question is, if the city is not able to spend the 30% advance, which is already in the bank, will it be returned to the state?
Yes. Now, we have not yet released what that process would look like in terms of us letting people know what wasn't approved and what's due back. But if you have not spent it on eligible purposes, then it would have to be recouped by the state. And we will release further information on that.
All right, next question is, we don't have any active police department, but we have a contract with the county for the sheriff's office for our law enforcement. Is that monthly fee eligible?
We might have to discuss that one and get back on it. It gets a little grayer when we're talking about contracted out services versus direct payroll. and Treasury wasn't extremely clear in what the intent was there.
Next question, can we submit public safety payroll twice? Since our city is within 2 counties, Walton and Gwinnett County, our public safety payroll exceeds the grant amounts.
So when the system was set up, I believe the cities and the 2 counties were condensed, so there should only be one grant in there that you would submit under.
And even if you could, you certainly could not apply for reimbursement for the same personnel twice. It would have to be a portion of personnel and different personnel if you could.
All right, next question is, can we provide a list of miscellaneous COVID expenses and upload the documents as one file so that we don't have to upload them separately?
So you could if they're the same allowable activity. Under public health, there's an allowable activity related to additional sanitation, and then there's a different one for PPE, the protective, whatever, personal equipment. So you could, I mean, we do ask, for example, there's one submission right now that has 42 pages of receipts. Obviously, that's going to take a lot of time for us to review. So if you could do a summary spreadsheet or even a 10 key tape, that would be helpful as well.
All right, the next question is, do we have until the end of the day, August 31st, or the end of the day, September 1st, to submit requests?
You have until 11:59 p.m. on September 1. But obviously, as has been said before, if you submit something that's ineligible, you don't get the opportunity to resubmit. So I would be certain it was eligible if I waited till the last minute, but better to go ahead and submit now in the event there is a mistake that can be corrected.
All right, next question is, we had an employee that we had to pay 80 hours of sick time because he had tested positive for COVID-19. I know that we can request reimbursement for his sick leave. My question is, can we also claim what we had to pay to a contract laborer to fill in for him?
I would say yes, if Rachel concurs. That would be over and above budgeted expenses as a direct result of COVID.
Right, I would agree.
All right, and it looks like the final question is, can we use some of the funds for the local food bank?
Yes.
That's all we have.
Okay. And now, do y'all have anything you want to add about some processes that you'd like to see the cities use, or any tips for them? Stephanie, Rachel, Corin?
I will definitely refer to Rachel and Corin since they've been the ones plugging through all these requests.
I would say as clear, make your submittals as clear as possible, and make the documentation as easy to read as possible. And I know it sounds kind of silly, but when you're looking at a lot of these, even I was just reviewing some payrolls that they were hard to read. It was just that they were a very faint scan of a printout. So anything you can do to kind of help us review it more quickly would be greatly appreciated. I think the summaries do help. And then if you do have questions, reach out to us before you submit something, because we might be able to give you some guidance that helps the submittal be better and prevent us having to return things for revision.
I would agree. And, like mentioned earlier, no sales tax. We've seen a fair amount of sales tax coming through. And like I mentioned with the payroll periods, if you do request that first one in March and it's a question as to when the start day is, let us know. Sort of those summary items of any receipts are very helpful as well. And then a detailed description, as if you're including, say, your fire chief or police chief, the detailed description that they have been doing COVID-related duties.
Well, I think that's been helpful information, and we do appreciate your time and spending with us today to give some tips to our cities so that they can get their expense reports downloaded, and hopefully we'll get them approved. That concludes our webinar. And again, thank you everybody for attending, and I hope it's been useful.
Thanks all.
Thank you all. Thank you, Stephanie, Corin, and Rachel. Thank you for being with us today.